Madam Ambassador of the United States of America, ladies and gentlemen, the EDP Foundation and the MAT are delighted to host this remarkable initiative by the US Embassy in this space dedicated to culture, science, and art. Madam Ambassador, we at EDP Foundation believe that art can change society. And today's two panel discussions with such relevant speakers couldn't be more topical, as they reflect on the relation between art and public and the need to expand and democratize the access to culture, and how sustainability of the planet is increasingly a theme that inspires and mobilizes artists. We welcome you all. Thank you for your presence and your support to culture. And on behalf of EDP Foundation, I wish you an excellent day. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. I feel a little bit like the voice of God here. So, on behalf of the U.S. Mission to Portugal, welcome to the 60th anniversary celebration of the Art and Embassies program. Special thanks to our amazing partners, Fundação EDP, whose early support allowed us to craft these amazing programs for all of you. Can you hear me? I think I'm just going to do it like this. Is that okay? Okay, great. No? Oh, God. Okay. Okay. I would like to acknowledge Miguel Coutinho here today on behalf of EDP. If it wasn't for your early support and your early confidence in us, this would never have happened. So please join me for a round of applause. Thank you. These programs are a collaboration of incredible efforts from my embassy team, the Arts and Embassies team, local and international artists and curators, and of course, you, the audience. We look forward to continued collaboration in arts, culture, and educational exchange to further strengthen U.S.-Portuguese relationship. The EDP Foundation is a leader in promoting programs and projects of excellence in the arts across so many disciplines: fine arts, dance, music, architecture, and artistic education, to name a few. Today, they're generously hosting two amazing panels, bringing together important American and Portuguese artists in dialogue around art in the public realm, expanding audience, and impact and art for change, addressing sustainability through the visual arts. We believe that these soft-powered tools can inspire change, as well as provide a platform for sometimes difficult but always enriching conversations about challenges facing both our countries. The biggest thank you to the most important guests, the artists whose work challenges us, inspires us, and creates space for these important discussions. James Baldwin told us that the purpose of art is to lay bare the questions that have been hidden by the answers. This is cultural diplomacy at its best, and we are so proud to share it with you, our Portuguese community. Thank you, enjoy the program, and please welcome Nora Halpern and the rest of our panelists.
Good afternoon, and thank you to Miguel and EDP for hosting us today, and thank you to the U.S. Ambassador Randy Charno-Levine, as well as Megan Beyer, Director of the U.S. Department of State's Art and Embassies program, for inviting me to participate as a curator and panel leader for the 60th anniversary celebration of the Art and Embassies program. Art and Embassies has been and remains a vital part of American diplomacy and cross-cultural dialogue, of which today's panel and both of our panels are a perfect example. I also want to thank Sujoya Roy, Penny Reckheimer, and Catarina Mendez from the embassy here for helping us get to this moment. As well as my curatorial colleagues, Velmud Landstra from Art and Embassies and Anna Sakalo for their wonderful and thoughtful collaboration over these past months. And finally, thank you to the artists and to our panelists who have come from so far to be with us today. Sanford Biggers, Leonor Antunes, Nick Cave, and Hank Willis Thomas for their participation today. Our panel is centered around the art in the public realm. We have 4 very accomplished and distinguished artists with us, so for the sake of timing, and so that we'll have time, I hope, for questions at the end, I'll do very, very brief introductions, but I encourage you to take a deeper dive into their respective bios online. I've asked each of the artists to talk about one work or one aspect of their practice which focuses on public engagement. We will move from the micro to the macro, first hearing from Sanford about his singular work, Oracle, and then turning to Leonor Antunes to hear about her project in collaboration with craftspeople and the crafts community. This will be followed by Nick Cave, who will talk about his performance work, and finally Hank Willis Thomas, who will tell us about the creation of 4 Freedoms, a collective he co-founded, and the work that they do to energize whole communities and to uplift voices across the United States, tribal lands, and territories. Already, you can see that the arc of today's conversation will take us from the impact of one artist and one work to the much broader community writ large. So let's first turn to Sanford, a multimedia artist whose work is an interplay of narrative, perspective, and history that speaks to cultural, social, political, and economic happenings while examining the contents and the context that bore them. He incorporates explorations of often overlooked cultural and political narratives from American history. Sanford was raised in Los Angeles, California, and currently lives and works in New York City. In addition to his practice as an artist and performer in all different kinds of media, he's been a professor at, among other places, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, as well as Columbia University in New York City. So take it away.
Good afternoon. Let's have the first image. So, to stay on topic, I am speaking about one work today, and this is a project that I did a few years ago in New York City at Rockefeller Center, and it's called Oracle. And I should start in describing this project by mentioning that I was living in Rome in 2017 as part of the American Academy in Rome. And while I was there, I was surrounded, obviously, by marble ruins of various types, of various eras and so on. And as a sculptor, I wanted to see what would happen if I started to make different types of objects in marble. I mean, we who have studied Western art we're very used to seeing basically what I call the propaganda of the canonical monochromatic white marbles that come from Rome and Greece. But the reality is many of these were actually painted, they were colored, they had pigments on them, a full spectrum range of color, and over the years, much of that had worn off. So now you have the monochromatic white. Interestingly enough, with African sculpture, a lot of the objects that we have come to know from European scholars as monochromatic black or brown pieces of art were actually polychromatic as well. They had raffia, they had pigment, they have all kinds of, they were adorned with various materials and so on. So there was a polychromy happening there. However, when trying to reproduce that and package it and market it to a European market, they got rid of a lot of that extra adornment, and they too become monochromatic. So you have whitewashing of art history and blackwashing. And of course, we all know the story of that African work and work from other indigenous groups influencing Western modernists. And then we have Cubism and all the other subsequent movements that happened from that. So that gives you a little bit of a conceptual background of how this work happened. So while I was in Rome, I started working in marble, and the first thing I did was imagine an African mask in marble, because I've seen them in wood, I've seen them in bronze, even gold, but never marble. And I wanted to know if it had the same gravitas as the marble works that we see from Europe. And then, of course, I was thinking of also the fragmentation and the notions of beauty and power that are displayed by the European marbles. So what I did for this piece was actually take various masks from different regions throughout Africa, combine them to make the head of this figure right here, and then I put it on top of the body of Zeus. And this is from the Zeus that was in Olympia in around 435 BC or so. And the only depictions of that Zeus sculpture that we have are represented on ancient coins and through verbal descriptions. So it's mythological in its own sense. So I was wondering, how would that rest in Rockefeller Center, which in and of itself is its own city contained in the middle of Manhattan. Any given day you have tens to 20, 30,000 people going back and forth 24/7 around this place. And to have this object there, now in tandem with the Prometheus that is there and the Atlas that is there, it really starts to talk about a more complicated mythology that actually is speaking to more than just one country or one continent. It starts to envelop the world and our notions of beauty and power and that discourse. So as it's cycling through, the first image you saw was at Rockefeller Center. And then after a few of those images, you'll see it in another location. So at Rock Center, I described this obviously very massive thoroughfare with many, many people going through it every day. A few months ago, it moved from New York to Los Angeles. So the second location that you'll see after this cycles through is on Wilshire Boulevard at the Hammer Museum. So it's at the intersection of Wilshire and Glendon. Also, it's on a major thoroughfare, so you have many thousands of people that drive by it, but very few people that actually walk by it. So it's a very different experience. So you've gone from more of a pedestrian to a commuter type of relationship. However, in both situations, I wanted to offer the opportunity for people to come up and leave offerings so that this really could be activated like an oracle. So when it was in New York, we were unable to leave things there because of security, and this was in the middle of COVID, so there was all kind of restrictions that we couldn't actually leave physical objects there. So I created an online platform that once or twice a month, you can actually consult with the oracle online. And the oracle was voiced by one of my favorite artists, musicians, and composers, Michelle Ndegeocello, who has a very sort of low and beautiful, mysterious voice, and she is known to speak in her own sort of profound and mysterious, enigmatic way. And you were able to call and online stream questions directly to her. Well, I will say them, because the oracle itself in history, many of the oracles were actually female, but for the sake of how we did this in a Rock Center, we didn't want it to be about gender at all. You were just asking the oracle, and you receive whatever answer the oracle gives. Typically, sticking with history, oracles give enigmatic answers. So sometimes she would laugh, sometimes they would laugh, sometimes they would say an actual answer, sometimes they would just play the guitar, or on harmonica, or just sneeze, or anything that they could do, because the idea is that the person asking the question has to really do the work. They're only giving more questions that they have to go inside and figure out the answer to. Now, when this was moved to Los Angeles, luckily, we were able to give offerings. In fact, Nora has given some offerings there too. So those pictures you see, the close-ups with all the objects around it, are literally people who are taking the time to get out of their car, walk around the block, get to this place, and bring something from home, bring a remembrance of a family member or a friend, and activate the space in that way. The piece will be there for 1.5 years, so we will do various types of programming. We will bring back the idea of the oracle that you can speak to, but we also will do performances that initiate there and walk around the museum and engage other aspects of the museum. But through the entirety of the run there, people are still encouraged to come leave flowers and any kind of keepsakes that they want to put there as an offering.
Thanks. So, Leonor, I'm going to move to you. And Leonor's practice, wonderful practice, provides a unique contemplation on modern art, on architecture, and design through a reinterpretation of sculpture in a given space. Inspired by important figures in the realm of creation in the 20th century, and often influenced by female protagonists, her work begins by measuring features of architecture and design that interest her. She then uses these measurements as units, which can be translated into sculpture. Embracing traditional craftsmanship from around the world, she employs materials such as rope, leather, cork, wood, brass, and rubber to create unusual forms. Among her many exhibitions, and in fact, she has a relationship here at EDP as an honoree, Leonor represented the Portuguese pavilion at the Venice Biennale in Italy in 2019. Leonor, as many in the room know, was born in Lisbon, but currently lives and works in Berlin, Germany. So.
Thank you. Okay, so I wanted to thank for inviting me for the panel. It's great to be among these amazing artists, and so thank you for that. And I wanted to talk about this project because it has a relationship with Lisbon, and I mean, among many other things, because this was the year, 2021, where I thought I would move back to Lisbon, and initially I wanted to work on this project called The Homemaker and Her Domain, which is a title I borrowed from Charlotte Perrien. It's a text she wrote in 1936 for a magazine, weekly newspaper called Vendredi, and she works about how horrifying were the conditions for living. And so I'm always borrowing stuff from other artists, other people, so this was like a way of me expressing the precise context of this installation. So this was a project, an exhibition I was invited to be part of the Festival d'Automne, which is a festival, it's a performance and theater festival that happens every year in Paris, where they invite artists to occupy a site in the city. So it's very rarely, I mean, at least for me, that I get invited to choose a site for my project. And I thought I wanted to be among students, and so this chapel is the chapel, it's called La Chapelle des Beaux-Arts, and it's, I mean, before it was commissioned in the beginning of the 17th century, but today it belongs, since the late 18th century, it belongs to the School of Fine Arts. And and it's full of plasters, casts from copies of other artists. And I thought it would be interesting to be first in the context of an art school, and secondly among just fake pieces. And so I wanted to engage a dialogue within two artists that I wanted to bring back into the work. One was a Japanese artist, weaver, designer. She was one of the first Japanese artists to study at the Bauhaus. She came with her husband in the 1930s to the Bauhaus. And the reason why she went, and this is interesting, it's because, so she's married with this very famous architect and photographer, and it's an arranged marriage because her family is very bourgeois. And she, the condition for her father to pay the travel to Germany, it's that she marries this man, and he borrows her family name, and then she accompanies him to the school. She was not interested in I mean, the story gets very complicated, but she's not interested in focusing on a particular study, but she engages with the weaving department, and she studies with people like Annie Albers and Gudrun Stolz. And the reason why I was interested in bringing and pairing her with Perrien, Charlotte Perrien work in Japan, was this notion of being out of context and being misunderstood within the work you do in a certain country. So she's Japanese, coming from a very traditional family. She has, her father is a tea master. He collects a lot of objects and kimonos and special fabrics. And she later engages this kind of cultural heritage into her work. And she's very criticized in the Bauhaus because she doesn't respect the color hierarchy, you know? You have to, it's a progressive school, it's a leftist school, but at the same time, kind of fascist in their way of teaching. And so she's very criticized for that. And I was interested in this kind of point of being out of context and being out of, her reality, but at the same time, she finds relations between tea ceremony and the Bauhaus. She thinks there's a lot of things in common, the way she dresses. She changes she's one of the first female. It's interesting to think about, like, Japan is an amazing, culture, but at the same time quite misogynist. And so very little women could study, and still today, and especially living abroad, no? And then I was interested in bringing Charlotte Perrien figure because, I mean, she was a Parisian, so to say, but at the same time she goes to Japan. So she goes to Japan 10 years later in the 40s, just before the German army invaded Paris. She leaves to Japan because she's invited to become a foreign designer who's going to bring the Japanese objects to the Western culture. And so, like, these two figures, in a way, become, like, on the one hand, you have, like, Michiko Amawaki, who's responsible because they were collectors, they were collecting furniture, so after they leave the Dessau school in Bauhaus in 1932, they form a school, they help forming a school in Japan, and they engage these ideas of the Bauhaus. So she's weaving, etc. And then you have people like 10 years later, a different background, they have never met each other, but they knew about each other. And then you have like her work in Japan where she engages with the community, she's very interested in the folks, indigenous crafts. She's also at the same time being pushed by the foreign minister, which belongs to the imperial family at that time, to be very focused on new materials, and that's exactly what she doesn't do. So because she doesn't have time, and she develops this series she develops an exhibition I'm not sure the date now, I think it's in 1941. So a few months after she arrives, she's invited to do this exhibition where she clearly doesn't respect the hierarchies of objects, which for Japanese traditions it's insane. Like you can't mix, I don't remember now, but a plate from somewhere, like a very low craft with another piece of very important craft, or contemporary potters, or bringing textiles, quite high quality textiles to use in upholstery, for example. And the second thing she's very criticized is the way she uses bamboo, because they are interested that she's exploring new materials, and they think she over-statistized the use of bamboo, but she doesn't really have time. She has very little time to work, and this is the material that is available. So in the beginning, she kind of translates her work into these new materials, or this new material that she's using. On the other hand, she started to produce new furniture, and it's interesting how she's very much criticized by, kind of fetishizing this idea of working with bamboo. And so the project starts with this installation, which is basically a lot of ceramic works. And I wanted to produce initially this project in Japan, but due to the pandemic, I decided to come here and work on it instead. And I got an amazing invitation by Catarina, who's here, and João, to work in this beautiful studio in Olivais. But I decided to work on this idea of like this kind of very 18th century display of works, and I wanted my work to be very much flat. So like posing installed on the floor, and this idea of horizontally, because the space is very high, you have a lot of things hanging, it's very mixed. And I worked with this workshop called Oficina do Castelo. I searched for several workshops, and I found this workshop, which was gigantic, run by these two amazing women. And I asked them if I could collaborate if I could create my project there, and the condition will be I have to stay here with you, and I have to learn the practice myself with you guys. And so by noticing, because it's also a way of understanding their practice and trying to, insert my own practice into the practice that they have, I thought they do a lot of restoration. So I thought they do a lot of tiles restoration, for example. So I thought, I'm going to make everything flat. Like everything is like meshed up on this kind of printer, and it's just about this kind of clay that how do you say it in English? Well, I forgot the name. But the idea was just to have these kind of flat pieces and have these elements that sometimes come up and down. And so the patterns are taken from designs by Michiko Amayaki's drawings. I wanted the colors to be, if we go back, I will show it later. Actually, there's a photo here. No, where is it? So that's Michiko's. And this is her drawing of carpet that she never realized, and that she's very much, criticized by this, combination of very earthy colors. And so I wanted to be very strict to the idea, these huges of colors. And so we use this technique of engobe, so everything is very much matte, and there's not much, I didn't want a ceramic to look like ceramic. I wanted ceramic to look like, could be something else, because, I've done other works which don't really like ceramic. And then at some point there are some other sculptures which are standing on this floor, which, I can explain this later, which come from Perrien's works, designs she did while she was in Japan, for example, this sculpture, or like this kind of objects, sculptures which are standing. I didn't want to place them on the floor, I wanted them to stand, but very low. So everything is just very flat and very horizontal. And they have these prints of, so it's just pressed on the clay, we pressed on the clay. They have these prints of this woven mats, these Mexican woven mats called petates. And the interesting for me was like these people, amazing people, wove these mats really fast. And they are not even considered, it's woven by hand, but it's not even considered an interesting or valuable object, because these mats exist in markets, they're placed on the floor, so people step in. Nobody really looks at them, so I thought I want people to look at these mats. I don't see it, but it's there, it's printed, it's the negative. And then lastly, just to finish this long conversation, so a year later, and this is an amazing coincidence, I got invited to be part of the Aichi Triennial in Japan, in the Aichi region. And Mami Kataoka was the director of the Mori Art Museum, and also she was the director of the Triennial. She had this vision, because I think this is very visionary. So I said to her, I don't want to produce anything new, I want to show an existing work, because I want to bring this figure back to Japan. And, and she had this vision to place the work inside this building, which is a building designed in the 50s. It's one of the first projects he designed, this architect called Kenzo Tanga. And this building is all about materials and proportions, and there's a lot of ceramic, there's a lot of wood. It's amazing. And I couldn't really, think of a better place to show this, this piece. These parts over there, it's all fabrics, and every tile is different from the other. It's amazing. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you, Leonor. So Nick, I'll introduce Nick by saying his work sits between sculpture, installation, performance, video, design to object, and fashion. He's perhaps best known for his sound suits, sculptural forms based on the scale of his body, initially created in direct response to the 1991 police beating of Rodney King, an unarmed black man in Los Angeles, California. Using materials that range from twigs to crystals to hair, his sculptures aim at viscerally critiquing racial justice. A beautiful retrospective of Nick's work for Othermore, which was organized by the MCA Chicago, just closed at the Guggenheim Museum in New York, and I was very fortunate to see it. Nick is based in Chicago, Illinois, so take it away.
What you're going to see is really a film that was created in Sydney, Australia. It's a piece titled Heard, and but I'm really going to talk about performance and how that is created, developed in my studio. And so for me, when I'm sort of, the studio really operates on three really sort of critical aspects of my practice, and that is equity, inclusion, and service. Those are sort of the three critical sort of parts of the practice that allows me to work in public, in performance space. So a project, what I tend to do is that I tend to use art as a vehicle for change. I'm a change agent. I will bring a project to a city. I then hire the city to build the project. And what that means is that through an invitation, I will come to your city and I am feet on the ground. I am asking myself, why am I here? Who lives here? And then what is the ask? And so I'm operating, engaging with social services, community centers, art institutes, as well as individuals within the arts. And so for a performance such as Heard, I need performers, I need musicians, I need vocalists. And so I do this open call in order to pull that team together. And then when I have pulled the team together, we then go into a residency collectively for it could be anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks, building the project. This particular piece, the original piece started in Texas. I worked with probably 8 social services and probably within 15 art cultural centers to build the actual objects. Working with fabricators, working with families. And so it took about a year to build this work, which is 60 objects. And then we go into building the work through this sort of rehearsal, working with the local choreographer. We then start to build the piece. Once we get the choreography down, then we bring in the musicians. So I'm really interested in this idea of mobilizing and really working with underserved communities in a very, very big way and sort of, creating this sort of space of possibility. Like, if you don't know what is possible, that's one thing, but if you have the opportunity to be in a space where you can imagine that changes one's life. Mm-hmm. And so that has always been so important to me, to be able to sort of create that kind of space for what is possible. And then we build the piece, we then sort of build the performance. And the performance may be run over a 4-day period. And then we conclude where we come together collectively and we talk about the process. We talk about how we made it. We talk about everyone's role in building it. And the testimonies are like life-changing for me. And at the end of the day, what you see in terms of the final performance, that's not really the work for me. It's really the process of getting to that place. And so for me, I think the most exciting thing when it comes to performance work is getting out of my way and allowing others to be part of something grand and spectacular. And then we create a piece such as heard here. Bob Faust is my special project director. But this is working in Sydney with a group of local dancers. The musicians for this piece were all indigenous, from the indigenous community there, which was like amazing. So.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
And here's a little glimpse of the final, part of the final performance. So you get a sense of the suits and the power and beauty of the movement of the people within the suits. So thanks, Nick. And let's move to Hank, who is a conceptual artist working primarily within themes of identity, history, and popular culture. His work often incorporates widely recognizable icons, many from well-known advertising or branding campaigns, to explore their ability to reinforce generalizations developed around race, gender, and ethnicity. Hank most recently unveiled the Embrace, a sculpture in honor and memory of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and his wife Coretta Scott King in Boston, Massachusetts. As I mentioned earlier, Hank is also a co-founder of the artist collective Four Freedoms, of which Sanford is a participant, which is known for many things, among which having created the largest public art project in American history. So I will ask Hank to talk about that 50-state initiative. Hank lives and works in New York City. So take it away.
Thank you. Thanks, Mom. I just realized I'm not used to talking and not looking at what I'm talking about, so I have to like stand over here, and I don't have a clicker.
Do you want the clicker?
Oh, see? Does it work? Oh, cool. That's better anyway. Hi, everybody. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Okay. It's so wonderful to be here. It's so incredible to see the huge collaboration of organizations that brought us here. Thank you to the ambassador. Thank you to Art and Embassies. Thanks, Mom. Thanks, Nora. And what I always think about when I create anything is how everything that I do that goes out into the world becomes a part of the people who experience it. And that actually is really important when we think about how we operate as citizens of the world, citizens of countries. And when I interacted with Norman Rockwell's Four Freedoms photographs, which were paintings, illustrations which were made in response to FDR's Four Freedom speech, where he talked about everyone being entitled to four basic freedoms: freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from fear, and freedom from want. And then that idea became propaganda through the Office of War Information for the United States to raise money for war bonds in World War II. And I was really fascinated. I don't think we have here the original Four Freedoms paintings, but these are remakes of those Four Freedoms that I made with my collaborators from Four Freedoms, in this case, Wyatt Gallery, Eric Gottesman, and Emily Shore. But we really were interested in the role of art in civic life as propaganda, but because all art in some way does function as propaganda for our beliefs. And who's featured and who is missing actually is also critical. And when we think about American propaganda, which we don't like to acknowledge that we do, I'm always interested in making sure that it looks like the America where I feel welcome. And that is an America where everyone is welcome and acknowledged as a human being. And so we were able to collaborate with hundreds of people to do 82 different versions of Rockwell's Four Freedoms. This is Dolores Huerta, who is at that time an 89-year-old civil rights activist who was really critical in advancing the role of United Farm Workers, and here is a same-sex couple who would not have been necessarily welcomed or acknowledged in 1943 and are still struggling to be acknowledged now. The two people at the front of the table here are Robert Nakamura and Karen Ishizuka, his wife. Robert Nakamura was interned by the United States government in Manzanar, and so it's really important for me to also think about, while I admire and adore a lot of the vision of many of our leaders, where we fall short and the actual real effects of those. And I think that's important because that's how, as my children age, I'm sure there will be things that I do that they'll be modifying and criticizing, and I want to be able to be as open-minded in that. And so we were able to kind of highlight that work on cover of Time magazine, remake it in all of these with different ways, using celebrities, using ordinary people. They were even featured on this site, which is called Federal Hall, which is the original site of the United States government near Wall Street in downtown New York, in front of a statue of George Washington. And what I didn't realize when I was younger, but I realize now, that if you say something, somebody's probably going to hear it. And it doesn't necessarily, what I learned from previous presidents, I'm not going to say which ones, but the power of branding is greater than almost anything else. And I've always been interested in using the language of advertising to talk about things that advertising couldn't responsibly talk about. And I believe that good art asks questions, and good design answers questions, and the quality of the questions actually dictates the quality of the answers. And so as artists, I believe our work is literally our agenda, our responsibility is to ask good questions. And I believe lawmakers, architects, graphic designers, it's your responsibility to answer them. And so this is a question that came up for me in Ferguson, Missouri, which is where this billboard came up when there was this debate in 2014 after Michael Brown was murdered by a police officer in the United States. Black Lives Matter became a rallying call. A counter rallying call was All Lives Matter. And I overheard someone say all lives matter, but some more than others. And so I was really interested in the kind of what's missing when we have to respond to Black Lives Matter with All Lives Matter. And Love Overrules is another billboard that I did, which is a motto that my cousin, Sunga Thomas Willis, who was a victim of gun violence in the United States, stated weeks before he was killed. This was a collaboration with Four Freedoms, but also 21C Hotel Museums. This is a billboard, a bus stop that we sent around LA with Jenny Holzer. And so what we've been able to do is take artists' work and put the work that's part of their practices in billboards all over the country. So we've done 500 billboards in all 50 states, plus DC and Guam and Puerto Rico and even Tokyo and London. This is B-Mike. I can't list every billboard, but in 2020, we collaborated with another organization called Unfinished, and we were actually asking artists to ask questions. And so this is a billboard actually from 2018 that Sanford talked about yesterday, which said "Just Us," which was in West Virginia. Or this was another billboard by an artist named Paula Crown, who I think was part of this program in Athens. Her response to what happens often when gun violence happens in the United States, where people send our thoughts and prayers. And this is one that really deeply impacted me. This was a billboard by Christopher Myers, who's sitting in the back row, which maybe he'll talk about tomorrow. But every refugee boat is a Mayflower. You'll talk about that tomorrow, perhaps, Chris? Raise your hand so everybody knows. And then more recently, we were able to we really wanted to do something that was acknowledging what was happening and is currently happening in Iran after the murder of Mahsa El-Hamini. And we collaborated with Shirin Nishat in Four Freedoms Park, as well as an artist named JR, to do this kind of really, to make this push and advocacy for Iran to be removed from the United Nations Council on Women, which when we launched the campaign literally 6 weeks before, the UN ambassador was saying it's impossible, and 6 weeks later there was a vote at the United Nations and they were removed as a result of direct response to our work. And so what's really been fascinating, thank you, but is how we really try to take models and reimagine them. So we're now wondering, what is an art-focused news organization? At Four Freedoms, we're constantly attempting to be at the center of art, commerce, education, and politics. And so we're at an art fair, Untitled Miami Beach, and then kind of having a news desk, thinking about how ESPN is, or, you know, if sports could have a news channel, art could have a news channel. This is what I'm thinking. And so this is a residency at the Brooklyn Museum, where we have my wife, actually, Rujeko Hockley, who's a curator at the Whitney, with Linda Good Bryant, a legendary American artist. And so this is what we've been doing. Then also, as was mentioned, I recently launched, put out the largest monument to love in the United States of America, a monument called the Embrace to Dr. Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King, inspired by this picture of them when he was awarded the Nobel Prize. And then part of my other practice is always putting suggestions or remembrance towards public intimacy in public space. And so this is at O'Hare Airport in Chicago. This is in Miami on the Underline. This is at the Super Bowl. And this is in downtown Brooklyn, New York. And thank you. Love overrules.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to everyone on the panel. I have a lot of questions, but I imagine that there are people in the room who do as well. So if you can raise your hand if you have a question. If not, I'm happy to ask some of mine. And there's people with microphones who will be moving around the room. But I don't see any hands at the moment, so I'm going to actually just ask one while we're looking, and that would be to Sanford, just because I've experienced Oracle both on Fifth Avenue and on Wilshire Boulevard. I know that sound is a really powerful component to both incarnations of the same piece, and I know that music is also a very powerful part of what you do. So can you just talk very briefly about the sound component?
Sure. Well, I mentioned earlier about the component of the piece where you can actually contact and ask the Oracle questions, but the use of sound actually changes in each of these locations. At Rockefeller Center, it's more of an open space, and you're inundated really by the ambient noise around there, which is subways and people and crowds and cars and buses and so on. So in some ways, when you experience the Oracle there, it does become an intimate experience because you have to block that out and deal with the piece itself. Of course, if you go to the online component, that even goes further insular because you could do that on your phone, you could do that at home, you could do that through headphones. In Los Angeles...
And there was a soundtrack.
There was a soundtrack through the entire complex of Rockefeller Center, which was a playlist that I compiled. I also have a band called Moon Medicine, and there is a DJ in my band, so the DJ, Jahi Sundance, and myself created a playlist that encapsulated songs that we thought were inspirational, thought-provoking, and so on, and that Rockefeller Center would let us actually play. So we had a playlist which is still available actually on Spotify at We Are the Oracle. And it's around an hour, maybe an hour and a half of songs that we just really thought were inspirational and motivating. In Los Angeles, again, a busy street, and as I mentioned, mostly cars, so for you to actually engage the piece, you have to get out and go to it. And once you do that, you walk downstairs and you're actually sequestered away from the noise of the street, and it once again becomes an intimate experience. So I have to say, one of the formal and performative aspects of the piece that is interesting to me is how there are opposite things happening. It's extremely large, it's monumental, so there's a sense of bombast and spectacle, but at the same time, it can be a deeply intimate and personal experience.
Thanks. So I know that we're very close to time, but I'll keep going until we see hands in the audience, and then we'll call it a day. But I had a question for you, Nick, about the testimonials that you talked about and how the life after, or the afterlife of these herds going around the world, how do they stay alive? All of the experiential side of it, the community engagement side of it.
Well, I think with the performance work, I think what's most important to me is that how do I leave an imprint in that city? Because in that sort of process, you would be amazed how what we're finding is that we're introducing a city back to itself. There are so many performers, and from dancers, musicians, spoken word artists, vocalists that all live within the same neighborhood and don't even know that of themselves. And so, you know, I'm interested in that sort of imprint and sort of allowing them to understand that you do not have to wait for an artist to come in to sort of seek you out, that you all are here. And how do you sort of maintain a relationship and build work amongst yourselves?
Beautiful. 2 minutes, okay. I'm going to go really fast to Leonor, who is very soon is going to present something here, which is quite exciting. And that is at the reopening of the renovated Gulbenkian Museum. She's been asked not only to have a show of her own there as part of the inaugural exhibitions, but she's also been asked to reframe and curate the collection. And to me, that's really interesting as an artist whose work is all about reframing. So if you could just talk just for a little bit about how you use your process of reframing and contextualizing as an artist in your role as a curator.
Yeah. Well, for me it's interesting because I always love to see artists curating works by other artists, and I think it's because it's so much part of my practice to look into, you know, legacies of other people's works. For me, looking at collection, in particular the collection of, I've done this another time in another museum, but it was a much smaller scale. And here, I mean, the collection is very problematic. I mean, for the reasons we know, and more reasons that we don't know, which is much very related with, you know, the collection is formed by the tastes of their directors in this case. And I found that, you know, it's somehow, it doesn't have to do with it's not a question of taste, but it's a, you know, it's an institution, so we should not really focus on their tastes, right? But on other issues which are so much more relevant. So I've been trying to look into actually female artists, a lot of female artists and queer artists, and there's not many artists of color in this collection, but we're trying to bring new works for the collection, which are not part of the collection, and trying to hybridize the collection. So it becomes a mix of objects installed in tables designed by another architect, who's an artist I really like from here, and also looking at, you know, some Portuguese artists, which I found extraordinary, and I've never knew part of their practice, which is very early beginning of their practice, which for me was a really understanding of their work.
Beautiful. And Henk and I work a lot together and have collaborated over the course of many years, and I never cease to learn things. And last night I was talking about, I said you, he said you mean we, I said me, you said you mean we. So for Four Freedoms, it's really always about the we, it's always about the collective. And if you want to give a little taste of what you think the collective is going to be doing in the near term to this group.
Sure, and I also wanted to shout out Ellen Sussman, who brought me into this sphere 10 years ago, nearly, when we went to South Africa. And South Africa was a really critical learning place for me, where I interacted with artists like Nicholas Shlobo, who talked about the importance. The thing he said that I embodied the most is he said, we have to live in the future. This is something he said at Art and Embassies event like 10 years ago that like pierced me. He said we have to live in the future before we get there. That way we won't be surprised when we get there. He said the problem with South Africa post-apartheid is that people weren't living in the future they wanted. So when it came, they didn't know what to do with it. And that was really important for me to think about. Like, you know, he didn't say I need to, we need to. So the call for me from that conversation is to live in the future that I am working for, and then be prepared for that future. And hopefully that's going to keep changing. And so that's what I invite myself and everyone who I engage with to do.
Thanks. And here's to that future. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.